Welcome to this session. This is a session on building checkpoints in your data ops. Irrespective of whether you are early in the data ops journey or more established, I believe this is a session that you would find extremely helpful and useful in terms of concrete experience that, and speaking from experience in terms of how valuable these checkpoints are in making sure you have a very reliable and predictable data ops as well as data pipelines that you're trying to be building. So first off, just a little bit about myself. So I'm Sandeep Uttamchandani. I'm the Chief Data Officer and VP of Engineering at Unravel Data. I've been in the data space for more than 2 decades. Started my career in IBM research and essentially spent my time both on building software and platforms, as well as running large data platforms for analytics and machine learning at scale. So in terms of building software, started with IBM, was at VMware, did my own startup as well. And in terms of running large-scale data infrastructures as part of IBM Global Services, really working with the banks in terms of modernizing and building data platforms, and more recently at Intuit QuickBooks, responsible for the end-to-end data platform from the transactional databases to the data lake to the pipelines powering machine learning and analytics, business-critical analytics dashboards. Now, through my career, I have also sort of captured some of my learnings in different forms. I have a book out there, orally book, talking about how data platforms can be made self-service, a topic which is very near and dear to my passion. Also, I have a podcast out there, all the CDO Battle Scars, really talking to fellow data leaders about what comes in the way when we think about delivering value from data. And the last bit is, I also have voluntary work that I do. So I co-founded Data for Humanity, really helping our nonprofits in their journey with data. So in this talk, the agenda is going to be the following. I'm going to just start off by talking about the whole reason why data exists, which is the goal to extract business value from data. After that, we'll get into the context of what does this look like in the form of data pipeline technologies and the battle scars or things that come in the way. And finally, going to get into solutioning, talking about the 6 data ops checkpoints that you should build and work towards building in your operations. So without further ado, let's jump straight into this. So it's no surprise, data is the new oil, right? It's one of those resources which is clearly changing industries. And if you look at several of the new companies out there, in fact, every company today, as we've been hearing through our speakers during the sessions, is a data company, right? Now, when you think about data being the new oil, how do you extract value from this oil? How do you leverage this oil? So it's all about getting business value when it comes to data, right? And there are various different forms to think about it. Like in the old days, like 20 years back, when you thought about value from data, it was in the form of data warehouses creating weekly reports. So you looked at reports 1 week from the past in terms of how the business is doing, how the business processes are performing. Now, fast forward today, based on where you are with respect to your data platform maturity, there are different kinds of insights and value that you generate from data. In fact, Gartner has a very interesting graph here talking about the analytics maturity model, right? Where you look at retrospective, what has happened in the past, interactive, what's currently going on, and predictive or foresight, what's going to happen moving forward, right? And if you see what we are doing through all the things that we do in data projects is really to answer questions and derive value either for the business or for customers in terms of really streamlining, right? And again, this is another interesting graph in terms of what data can help us answer, right? And a very simple way to think about it is at the bottom of the graph, right? It's really talking about what's the state of the business. It's called descriptive analytics, right? How is the business doing right now? Then you go a little bit further and you get into diagnostic analytics, which is why is that happening? Why did the sales go down? Or why is this marketing campaign not performing, right? Little bit further beyond that gets into predictive analytics in terms of based on what we know, what's going to happen next. In fact, you can think of data products also doing predictive analytics, like what should be the price of this house, or I'm trying to rent my house for like on Airbnb, what's the right price? These are all predictive modeling. And basically all the way on the top, you get into what's referred to as prescriptive analytics, right? Not just predicting, but also being very prescriptive as to how to get there. What do you need to do? What changes are required? And this is what the data journey is all about, right? Now, even though there's a lot of data, even though there is maturity with respect to the kinds of tools and platforms that exist today, the ground reality is that a big percentage of projects actually fail. In fact, some interesting stats, like almost 85% of projects fail to deliver value. And I have seen this firsthand as well, right? Now, obviously, there are business aspects to it in terms of ill-formed problems, not being clear what the success metrics are. But a big chunk of it goes back into the technology related issues, right? In fact, the three C's that Kunal was mentioning earlier, complexity of technology, crew, which is the people part, and then coordination, which is more of the process piece, right? And all these three are really what comes in the way to, I would say, stop projects or really are inhibitors in making projects successful, right? And this is what really data ops or the goal of data ops is in terms of how do we streamline and make sure that we are able to deliver in an end-to-end fashion from raw data or idea to insight, delivering business value. Now, before I get further into this, I just wanted to set some context here so that we are all on the same page with respect to what is behind these projects. When we say a data insight needs to be delivered, what does that even mean, right? So here's the way I look at it. Behind every successful insight, an insight here could be your BI dashboard, machine learning model, process data, and whatnot. Behind every successful insight is a reliable data pipeline. And when I talk about a data pipeline, it really is a series of transformations that you do to the data, all the way from starting from transactional sources to getting it into the lake, what you refer to as ETL or ELT, right? Doing the data transformations, preparing the data, building the right, I would say, models in the form of a BI dashboard, ML, and whatnot. That's what a pipeline represents. What are all the series of logical transformations, right? And throughout the day-to-day, you've been actually listening to thought leaders looking at various aspects of this problem in terms of as the data is going through this pipeline, how do we think of governance? How do you think about data quality? How do you think about orchestration and so forth? Now, the real root cause of the complexity today is that this pipeline, implementing this pipeline today, involves multiple different technologies. In fact, this is an interesting picture published by Andreessen some time back, where end of the day, this pipeline that we talked about requires several technologies to work together, all the way from ingestion to data processing to storage to serving. When you think about all the different choices you need to make. Just to give you one example, there is no single answer on the right query engine. Depends on if you're doing batch, interactive, real-time streaming, your requirements will be changing. There's no single answer on what's the right ETL process. In fact, should it be ETL? Should it be ELT? Should you be transforming data in a streaming fashion before at the time of ingestion? Should you be capturing raw data one shot or raw data in your lake and then creating bronze, silver, gold pools? Should there be a serving layer, which is a graph database versus a key value store versus time series database? What's the right visualization model? These are all questions which have no silver bullets. Essentially, it varies from organization to organization based on business needs, maturity of the teams, maturity of the data. Right? And that is what makes technology for these pipelines complicated. In fact, if I were to show you this next picture, this is an actual representation of a data pipeline from one of my previous roles, where, and this is actually a lineage graph showing a pipeline with all the transformations serving a dashboard, serving business critical metrics, which were extremely critical, reported as a part of the earnings to the Wall Street teams. So this is reality when it comes to how involved data pipelines are. Not only is the complexity in terms of number of transformations, but also the number of different technologies involved, right? Now, to sum this up, now that you understand what a data pipeline complexity looks like, right? Let's really step back and think about how is this pipeline written. Now, the fact of the matter is that any pipeline, the implementation can be broken into 4 phases, right? There's a discovery phase where you go and look for the data sets. Then there's a prep phase, data wrangling, transformations. Then there's a build phase, which is where we'll be writing, and each phase essentially again has different technologies. So when you're in the build phase, you're basically writing queries, which is the business logic, the business matrix, generating output matrix, generating something else. And then eventually there's a publish phase. And this is a continuous ongoing loop. It's an iterative cycle. And the interesting point about this iterative cycle is that it is a team sport. It requires multiple different personas, from a data scientist, a data analyst trying to access the data, use the data, to data engineers trying to actually build out robust transformations, to product managers, business operators trying to extract, understand, make sense of the matrix, asking for changes, asking for transforming them in a form which is more and more useful to the business. And in this whole process of data ops, when you think about data ops involved to deliver these pipelines, there are hundreds and thousands of these pipelines that are running every day, right? Again, using some of the statistics of what I used to drive, as well as notes from folks I've been working with, peers in the community. There are, on an average, thousands of these pipelines which have to deliver and complete in a time-bound fashion with SLAs for the business to appropriately use them in the right form. Right? So think of a risk and fraud detection pipeline. Think of a market pipeline. Think of customer churn prediction pipelines. These, on the other side, are then being used to take actions to stop the customer from being lost or stop the fraud from happening. So you can understand the criticality. And as you think about the whole data ops process, to sum up some of the battle scars, and these are the battle scars which really make the whole process very difficult, right? We heard speakers talk about SLAs, missed SLAs, in terms of how do you make sure that changes to the pipelines happen in a timely fashion? How do you ensure the resources are being appropriately utilized? How do you make sure that it is not out of control? How do you detect resource contention? How do you stop the whole finger pointing that typically happens between data engineering teams and IT teams and the data users? Because data users don't have the engineering background, they have the business domain, and the data engineers understand the engineering pieces but don't really know exactly the business context in which some of the models and frameworks and queries were written. And this, folks, essentially is really what I wanted to address in the context of one way, having been through this cycle, having been through, I would say, the misery, right, the data ops, battle scar hell, wanted to share a very concrete piece of work which has helped tremendously, in similar experiences, and also working with individual folks in data leaders. It's something that you will hear around. In fact, in the panel sometime back, Kumar was talking about checkpoints as well. So I wanted to now sort of switch gears and talk a little bit about the solutioning part and something that you can concretely do as you get back to work tomorrow or later in the day, right? Checkpoints is really about how do you make sure that as you're transforming, as you're going through this infinity loop, through the different steps, to make sure that at the end of each step, you are validating whether that specific step has met the right success criteria, right? And this is what I would basically say from a practical view standpoint. There are 6 checkpoints that, if you were to build in your data ops, can tremendously help to make the whole process reliable and predictable, right? And these 6 checkpoints, which I'll be talking about very briefly after this, is the planning checkpoint at the end of testing, checkpoint as a part of deploy, checkpoints for operate, monitor, and optimize. I'm going to walk through this. Now, folks, one of my motivations as I've been a part of Unravel with all this background was to make sure that these checkpoints are made easy and available as a product. In our past experiences, we kind of had to hand build some of these more homegrown. So part of my motivation was really to make sure that as we roll out and continue to build and deliver more and more intelligence in Unravel, making sure that these checkpoints are available out of the box. So that has been a mission, something again that I'm personally passionate about, as well as the entire team has been driving with a lot of energy. So with that, I'm going to jump in. Just a quick time check. I know about 10 minutes, so I will sort of speed through this, but happy to take questions and even connect offline. The first checkpoint is the planning checkpoint, right? Now, when you think about planning checkpoints, there are a lot of different aspects that comes to planning. I just wanted to highlight something key, something that have been burnt in the past. When it comes to, oftentimes when a project gets started, right, we are typically unclear in terms of what are, I would say, the right resources required for this project, right? I'll give you an example. Like typically when pipelines are developed for like building out any kind of models or insights, this example is like this team was working over the weekend and they spun up GPUs to run their pipeline, right? And again, at that point, there was no checkpointing. So the entire loop just goes through, right? And what we figured out is we incurred about $80,000 in just over the weekend. And it turned out that that pipeline that was built out, that insight that was built out, was actually not even business critical in the sense in the ranking of business importance. It was pretty low in terms of what the business cared about, right? So this is where the planning checkpoint comes in. That is, before any of these things get, I would say, and in the very first step, making sure that are we even leveraging and applying the right technologies? Are we sizing the infrastructure right? Which is absolutely critical. It's very easy to throw in GPUs, throw in a pretty, I would say, beefy set of combination of CPU and memory when you require it, right? In fact, one of the screenshots you're seeing there is a capability that Unravel has, and a lot of customers are moving into the cloud in terms of really right-sizing the resources they require in the cloud. And when I think of right-sizing, there's no single answer. It's about what trade-off are you willing to make? Trade-off with respect to the SLA or the performance in comparison to cost. So planning checkpoint is the checkpoint number one. As any project goes through, having a very clear checkpoint discussion in terms of, have you thought through the requirements? Have you mapped correctly? Is this aligned with the business priorities? You'd be amazed that we had done this analysis in terms of the pipeline costs were completely the inverted triangle compared to the actual businesses they were aligned with. That is, the pipelines using the most were the least in the criticality of what the business required, and vice versa. Planning checkpoint is your checkpoint number one. Your next checkpoint in the DataOps cycle that you really need to build out. And when I think of these checkpoints, it's about how do you automate and create a formal process. So it's a process as well as a tool. From a tool standpoint, really highlighting what you get from Unravel out of the box, but really very important to think of this also as a process and a mindset you need to build for your teams. So when it comes to testing, again, highlighting one key aspect, which is I've seen a lot of testing phases go through and errors go completely undetected. And this is actually an artifact of, like, with multiple technologies involved, going to the individual logs, actually getting the errors, having that due diligence tends to be very, very difficult, right? So in the test checkpoint, in fact, one of the things we have focused is, a very clear listing of errors. Again, if you look at the error tab within what Unravel provides, it's basically an aggregation of errors. So that's really critical in terms of not letting these errors go past and eventually burn you when you're actually running this in production, because these undetected errors, think of them as potential even warnings in the software engineering world. Knowing what they are super critical. Also in the testing phase is focusing on efficiencies, because testing data sets tend to be small. And even in those small data sets, if things are inefficient, things are just going to multiply and explode when you're going to go at production scale. No matter how much we aspire, testing environments and production deployments, the data sets are typically not always at the same level as one would want. So testing checkpoint should really be, have you looked at all the errors? Have you fixed resource efficiencies? There's also the aspect of quality and result correctness, which is where some of the other tools come in terms of data validation, so to speak. Once you're done with a test checkpoint, the third checkpoint is really about deploying. And this is the way I define this checkpoint is this job ready for promotion to the production environment, right? So when you think of deploy checkpoints, this is looking at each and every stage in terms of, oftentimes it's just amazing that the configurations of these jobs, you can see an IO intensive job, which is a part of a pipeline, not being allocated enough of the IO bandwidth, the CPU IO balance, which is very, very critical, right? It's just sitting there doing nothing. The CPU part would be like very small compared to a really huge IO cycle time. So before deploying, really making sure that, because in the production environment, your schedules are going to be tight. You do want to make sure that each stage, removing the bottlenecks in the form of the right balance of compute, memory, and storage, as well as deploy checkpoint is about, is this the right time schedule? Because this is another dimension where if you schedule the jobs incorrectly or pipelines incorrectly, you may impact something else, which is going to become even more difficult to debug and sort of make sure the business requirements are met. So deploy checkpoint is about, is it ready for promotion? Have we found the right scheduling window? And is this really optimized enough? Obviously, it will never be 100% optimized, but having a threshold. Most of the customers we work with have some thresholds they have defined, which really help them in making this decision more in automated fashion. After your deploy checkpoint is in production, and this is where you need an operational operate checkpoint, where periodically you need to be looking at, and again, when I say periodically, it's not that you're doing it in fixed intervals, because a lot of the information here can also be defined as alerts. So But the key here in the operating checkpoint is to make sure that there's no rogue usage on the clusters. In fact, a single rogue job can hog the resources up, really bring down and cause a lot of trouble when it comes to other business critical pipelines which required to be done. So operating point is really to have that kind of a watch in terms of, is there a deviation happening in the SLA? Is there a rogue usage that is currently going on? It's like an analogy here in the security world is like, you're guarding your defense. Is someone trying to penetrate into your firewall? So thinking of the operating checkpoint as a mechanism and making sure that it is part of the process, because left unchecked, it becomes nobody's job until it's too late. Imagine business process or a business pipeline running for 15 hours, right? And kind of failing out in the last few phases because of potential rogue data contentions, things that I have seen from the past. It becomes very painful because you don't have enough time to get back to make sure that you're able to run these in a timely and correct fashion. So operating checkpoints are super critical. The more important your pipelines are, the more you need to focus on having a very good operational checkpoint. Next is monitoring. So in the monitoring checkpoint, it's really all about having clear flows in terms of tracking alerts. Now, again, these capabilities come out of the box from Unravel if you're using the product. And it's really a matter of taking these and mapping them into whatever processes you have when it comes to alerts, if you're using, right? Looking at anomalies in your pipeline. Why did this take, double the time? The kind of analysis that Unravel provides in terms of proactively helping you break down what really happened. So you typically don't just do root causes when something bad has happened. This is a part of monitoring which should be ongoing, looking at, okay, is there an anomaly? Why is there a shift happening? Is my data size increasing, which is causing my pipeline runtimes to change? And that would basically mean you need to retune. Last but not the least is the optimized checkpoint. So this is the part where obviously you have to do it at some frequency. One of the biggest myths I have seen is that optimize is seen as a one-time operation. It's never a one-time operation. With data skews that are changing, with new workloads that are coming in, causing resource contentions, this is an ongoing process. Improving the pipeline performance, looking at the cost of both the application and the clusters, and making sure the cluster utilization is the highest possible, because this is the only way you would make resources available for new projects. The business will have more work to do. It's all about how can we get more done with less on the platform side. So wrapping up, folks, keeping an eye on the clock here. So had to speed through the last few slides, but the key takeaway I really want you to take away from this discussion, and if there's one slide you remember, it's really about ensuring reliability and predictability by building checkpoints in your DataOps cycle. You don't have to think about building all checkpoints on day one. Most customers we've seen start with one and then incrementally start building from there. But without these checkpoints built in through the tool and the process in place, it's really a ticking time bomb. I think that would be my key advice here. And speaking from experience, it will help you sleep through the night, which is a bliss to have. So I'd like to now open up for questions before I wrap up. In terms of next steps, go check out the free trial that we're offering on the Unravel website. Kick the tires yourself, get a feel of the product, something that you can try out, and hopefully that gets you going in terms of taming the complexity of data ops, which is a huge problem the community is facing together. Yeah, with that, I know we are on the dot from a time standpoint. I'm going to see if there are questions that we can answer here while I'm waiting for more questions to come in. So one question I see here was the difference between ETL and ELT and data pipelines in data operations? Well, when you think about, so extract, transform, load versus extract, load, transform. So today, in the era where the intent is to capture everything into the data lake, it's ELT. You extract, you load it, and then you're basically creating derived data sets in the lake. So a lot of the operations here focus more on making sure, let's just get the data. Let's not worry about understanding or transforming the data while it's coming in, and then preserving the raw data. From an audit standpoint, several examples or several models require going back to the raw data sometimes, right? Be it compliance, be it interpretability of ML models. ETL is more of the traditional way where the intent was in a data warehouse world where you were doing more on schema on schema on write, where every time you were taking the data, you knew what it meant, you transformed it, and then you wrote it in a form which was consumable. So I would basically say there are some business metrics which are very well governed, which are still ETL, but a growing majority is ELT. And for each of them, you have to build the right checks and bounds, which tend to be different in depending upon ETL versus ELT. Okay, I don't see any more questions here. I know we're a minute over. Thanks, everyone. Hope this was helpful, and looking forward to hearing, from all of you. Please do give a try at the SaaS trial, and available to answer any questions. You can reach out to anyone from Unravel. Happy to follow up with any follow-up questions.